It's as if the government would be able to peek into your home and listen into your conversations with your loved ones about how frustrated you are about a government's policies. I mean, it's terrifying.
As threats to free speech escalate around the globe, Hasan Piker is constantly in the crosshairs. The leftist Twitch streamer has been targeted by multiple governments for his commentary. He was recently banned from entering the UK, a venue for a rally he was set to appear at in Denver mysteriously canceled, and multiple members of Congress are actively trying to get him deplatformed. So why doesn't more of the left care about protecting free speech online? Why aren't more big leftists speaking out against these draconian internet surveillance laws being passed in the name of child safety or cracking down on big tech as if that's what they do? Well, Hasan is here today to discuss all of that. We're going to dig into why leftists should fight to protect Section 230, what makes the Kids Online Safety Act and other laws like it so incredibly dangerous, how Democrats became the pro-censorship party, and why everyone on the left should be talking about things like the Jawbone Act, a new law that could actually protect against government censorship pressure. Hasan, welcome to Free Speech Friday.
It's great to be here. Unfortunately, under not such great circumstances, I feel like what's good for Free Speech Friday is really bad for American society, for the Western world in general. And I've been a victim of many anti-speech initiatives, especially as of late.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, obviously you're banned from the UK. Recently, your rally in Denver was canceled that you were supposed to attend. And you've just been subject to so much sort of censorship and I think government pressure to remove your speech from the internet. It's an issue that you deal with all the time.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because, like, look, free speech is not an infinite concept for the most part. There are very few people that are consistent in terms of like defending speech that they don't like, right? But what I mean is the way that we understand free speech or the way that we discuss free speech in theory is very different than the established boundaries around free speech, right? There's certain things that are crimes or defamation, for example, that is not protected speech. But free speech is supposed to give you an expansive protection, and especially in the United States of America, it's the most expansive, right? And yet, I think my argument always has been that America only gets to have this expansive free speech liberty and free speech protections, which they don't always follow through on, right? The assassination of historic revolutionary black leaders, or, you know, the Red Scare, McCarthyist trials, and you know, blacklists in Hollywood, things of that nature have always undermined this fundamental principle that we think we believe in, that we advocate for. And yet the expansive free speech protections have only been afforded to a country that is dominant, right? America gets to not be threatened by someone like myself and what I'm saying because it's a powerful nation. It's the most powerful nation on earth. And yet, due to geopolitical incidents, due to the decline of American empire in general, it's spread too vast, America no longer feels as unthreatenable around the globe. Its power around the globe and its hegemonic status is waning. And therefore, nowadays, they're taking a closer look at dissidents. And as someone who's Turkish, someone who grew up in Turkey, I watched a weak and an autocratic government consolidate power in the hands of the few, while simultaneously taking very aggressive stances against those who are political dissidents. I saw this, I experienced this in Turkey, you know, the prosecution of cartoonists and journalists. I mean, there's an entire prison dedicated to political dissidents in Turkey. There's numerous prisons now. I never thought that I would see something similar in the United States of America, but I think we're heading down that direction now. And this is unfortunately what weak countries do. And America is becoming a weak country.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that you bring up Turkey, of course, as well, because Turkey passed a very draconian internet law restricting speech online. And all of these social media companies, of course, just went right along with it. And we see a lot of these social media companies constantly go along with speech restrictions, whether it's in India, Saudi Arabia, you know, all of these countries that have, you know, sort of intense restrictions around online content. Now we're seeing even in the UK, right, them attempting to pass this social media ban, which is effectively digital ID for everyone, where you're going to have to scan your face or upload your documents to use the internet. And here we have KOSA as well, the Kids Online Safety Act that is currently, that Marsha Blackburn's attempting to sort of push through Congress. I'm curious how close you're following this like online speech restrictions, because I agree there's been this offline crackdown on journalists. Marginalized people have always been more censored than the powerful, obviously, here. But we're just seeing this, I think censorship also escalate across the internet. And we're seeing some really scary laws like the Kids Online Safety Act and the No Fakes Act and some of these other laws that are sort of meant to restrict speech. And yeah, I'm curious how quickly you're following these and how concerned you are that they could be weaponized against you.
I mean, it's terrifying. I think that taking away anonymity on the internet is a tremendous opportunity for the surveillance state to start prosecuting people however they see fit. Conversations that you might have in private, or what you think is in private with your friends in a joking manner, could be prosecutable. I don't think a lot of people understand that reality. And and I don't think a lot of people are ready for what that would look like. I mean, this is one step removed from being able to prosecute people's thoughts. It's as if the government would be able to peek into your home and listen into your conversations with your loved ones about how frustrated you are about a government's policies, a government's initiatives in a certain way. And then, boom, all of a sudden, you got the speech police knocking down your door. Now, in the past, this would have been an exaggeration. Like, people would say that's ridiculous, and yet we are inching closer to that reality. And it's not like the neo-feudal, techno-feudalist overlords are shy about revealing that is precisely what their perspective is. A lot of Western billionaires want to design this panopticon and want to create some semblance of a social credit system in the way that they claim China has, which is ironic because while China heavily surveils its population, certainly they don't even have a social credit system beyond a pilot program that they implemented in one prefecture, and then they never actually used it. Like, they just tabled that system. And it was never as aggressive as the one that Americans presented it as. And it's really interesting that you have tech CEOs going to conferences and literally talking about how everyone is always going to be surveilled at all times, and that's going to make them much more polite. And what they talk about there, when they're talking about politeness, it's not actually about politeness at all. It's about the elimination, the eradication of dissent. They want to make sure that your most private thoughts are both monetized and also surveilled at every given moment. And they want to be able to engage in direct social conditioning. And I think that's a terrifying prospect. Obviously, that's still maybe a decade in the future.
I think it's now.
I'm just saying, knocking down your door and arresting you, or sending a drone swarm to your house because you're having a private conversation and your TV is spying on you. Because your TV is currently spying on you, but it's not actionable yet, is what I mean.
I disagree. I mean, we have people like the woman in Virginia that was arrested just for being in an anti-ICE group chat. We have the government sending hundreds of subpoenas a week to these social media platforms to unmask anonymous accounts. I mean, I think you're right that it's not as bad as the UK, where they're arresting over a dozen people a day for speech crimes, essentially. I think it was 12,000 people arrested last year in the UK. But it is concerning. And I think what's scary to me is I've been covering this movement for 10 years, really since FOSTA SESTA, which was the first horrible major amendment to Section 230. Terrible, terrible consequence. But, it was really driven by the Heritage Foundation, by Morality and Media, aka NCOS. And it didn't have that much traction with liberals. It wasn't until liberals got on board and started framing it as this way to protect children or crack down on big tech that it really started to get motion. And even today, you see a lot of political candidates, Democrats, leading the charge on this stuff in Congress and running in races across the country. Now that you're a Democrat, Democrats are listening to you. What is your message? Because every Democrat that I speak to in elected office is like, well, it's convenient. It's popular with parents. It's an easy political win, to trade away our rights. And obviously, everybody loves mass surveillance. I
think it's terrifying, and they need to not allow this to happen. And I think that it's deeply unpopular with the youth, and it probably would be unpopular with the parents as well if they realize that this has nothing to do with protecting children and everything to do with surveilling them And I think that in places like the UK, they kind of understand that now that it's like being initiated. Because how do you make sure that everyone is over the age of 16? Well, everyone has to put their ID and their facial scan on their phones, either via like by way of Apple or directly put your identification on the internet through these third-party systems that will basically, I assume, operate like a face key. And those things are not protected at all. I mean, virtually every other year, there's another initiative where, hackers gain access to a trove of data and our social security numbers. Yeah, our social security numbers are out there for whoever wants to access it. And this makes us even more vulnerable beyond the obvious surveillance capabilities that are profound. I mean, de-anonymizing the internet is going to make things very difficult. It's just like people kind of understand intrinsically what this feels like when we talk about flock cameras, when we talk about mass surveillance in public spaces, and how your face is not something you can hide, and they can associate that with your identity, and they can track you everywhere you go. And that creates an environment of fear amongst people. But when it comes to the internet, for some strange reason, they don't understand that surveillance is different than a surveillance in the meat space, surveillance in real life. Because at that point, they're basically figuring out what your thoughts are. They can create these unbelievably sophisticated psychographic profiles. And when I say they, I mean anyone can do this, right? Anyone that has access to this data that's readily available, that's either being sold in these marketplaces, or data that goes beyond that, very private data that goes beyond that, can just track you down and figure out with the exact same methodology that the McDonald's application uses to figure out when you're hungry, to figure out when you're angry, to figure out how they can manipulate you. And then you pair that up with like some of these AI initiatives that people talk about as far as social conditioning goes. These are, LLMs are mass adopted at this point, especially for the next generation. They utilize it. There's obviously some great utility for artificial intelligence, but then there's also this terrifying prospect that these are chatbots that you feel a sense of closeness to because they're designed to create this feeling within you. They're designed to be agreeable. And then I hear, Jonathan Greenblatt and all these other high profile Zionists speaking at different conferences talking about how they're going directly to these AI companies to make sure that they upgrade their Hasbara initiatives to manipulate the way people think about Israel and its war crimes. I'm truly terrified about what that future looks like.
If you're watching this video and you like my work, please support me on Patreon via the link below or buy a paid subscription to my tech and online culture newsletter at usermag.co. That's usermag.co. I don't have any long-term brand partnerships, and a lot of my content is effectively demonetized. I've lost major brand deals for speaking out on certain issues and for challenging power. As you can imagine, advertisers are not exactly eager to work with somebody who covers a lot of the topics that I cover and talks about the things that I talk about. These videos I make are entirely funded by you, and I can't continue to make them without your support. So if you get any value out of the videos that I create and you want me to be able to create more, please support me on Patreon or Substack via the links below. On Patreon, I do bonus episodes, monthly Q&A live streams, and post frequent updates about my work. My Substack newsletter gives you a bi-weekly roundup of everything that I'm seeing and reading and paying attention to online. You can also get my newsletter on Patreon. Once again, the links to everything are below in the description. Every dollar of your support makes such a difference. I mean, it's interesting that you bring up AI. There's been a lot of discussion in terms of AI and the First Amendment, and should we have sort of open access to information through AI? And I think you're already seeing, as you mentioned, Israel, but also just all of these different corporate interests and people trying to exert influence over the information that people can access through AI. And will they be able to get, as people sort of move into this new information age, will information be open and free, or will we just be getting propaganda through these new systems? And because the technology is so new, I think they've been able to get a lot of people on the left on board with terrifying policies by claiming that it's cracking down on big tech, as if mass surveillance ever cracks down on big tech. I mean, this is how we got FOSTA SESTA. It was framed as cracking down on big tech. And a lot of leftists today will say, we have to repeal Section 230 to crack down on big tech. Can you debunk that idea? Because I think a lot of people are very misinformed. I mean, somehow they believe that mass surveillance will, hold big tech accountable.
Yeah, I think any kind of initiative to give the government an opportunity for social conditioning, or more of an opportunity to demand what kind of speech is permissible, is going to lead down a very scary path. I mean, we're already seeing it. Look at the Ellison purchase of TikTok. I mean, that was deliberately done. They very openly talked about the forced sale away from China into American ownership, and what basically pushed that conversation over the hill was Israel, right? They're very open about it. Mitt Romney would go on these panels and straight up say it out loud. Like, teenagers are going on TikTok and they're developing an attitude that we don't like about Israel's war crimes, so we should exchange ownership over this algorithm and give it to someone who will manage it better, someone who will actually engage in this mass social conditioning. And Ellison was right there, one of the biggest donors to the IDF. And we're seeing that already. It's not like a secret at all. So I am very fearful that the government will then turn around and demand further censorship over platforms on what kind of speech they find to be inappropriate, or dare I say illegal. I mean, look, I'm victim of a dual bipartisan messaging bill, a condemnation bill, where they pair me next to Candace Owens, right? And Candace Owens is actually an anti-Semite. Now, should that be bannable speech? That's a totally separate conversation. Should the government have any say over what is bannable speech or not? I don't think so, right? But the reason why they put me on that bill and pair me up with someone who's actually anti-Semitic is to drive home this argument that I am a scary anti-Semitic radical terrorist, a speech terrorist, if you will, who must be deplatformed. Because if that messaging bill, which is probably not going to pass, at least according to the congresspersons I've talked to, they're like, this is ridiculous. It's just a donor play for the most part. But if that were to somehow pass, right, that creates tremendous pressure on these tech companies to ban me, to deplatform me because of my anti-Israel advocacy. At a time when my position on Israel is not even this radical position at all. My position on Israel is the overwhelming majority's position on Israel. So this is truly a terrifying prospect for a very different dystopian future that technological availabilities have created. In the past, you had pamphlets and people would try to take down the printing presses, and now they're controlling the internet, and that creates a lot more control over how you feel, how you think. And I don't think enough people are aware of this. I don't think enough people are thinking about it because they're looking at the other side of this, because there is some validity to the other side's argument as well. Obviously, they have to present a good argument. And that argument comes from the fact that children are constantly on the internet. Their brains are being broken by what they're seeing. Algorithms are driven by, obviously, violence and right-wing reactionary commentary for the most part that's churning out, the next generation of sometimes nihilistic extremists, as the government likes to call them. And then you have this radicalization pipeline that goes all the way to what they're calling terrorgram, right? Telegram channels that are specifically designed to find vulnerable young teenagers, men and women, that are shut-ins for the most part, and goad them into doing acts of violence. And it's been fairly successful for them all around the world, as a matter of fact. The San Diego mosque shooting that happened recently is connected to these groups. I mean, it has the same telltale markers of a terrorgram, Order of Nine Angles style incident. And I think there are probably much better ways of combating this violence. And it's very clear that this surveillance state has not been able to thwart this kind of violence. to begin with. There is always that classic meme when in the aftermath of another mass shooting, they say, oh, he was on our radar. And it's like, well, you guys didn't do anything about it. So you're just surveilling people and that's it. And yet what it has been very effective in combating is creating a chilling effect on speech and stopping organizing, because people are fearful that the government will come after them. And this new technology makes it much easier to do that. So on the front end, you have social conditioning and social manipulation. And on the back end, those who still make it through that filter, who are independent thinkers, can be consistently surveilled and maybe even prosecuted for what they're thinking. Not thinking about engaging in any crimes, mind you, but that could still change. Maybe one day we're looking at this administration right now. I mean, they got a new White House initiative that my name is on as well, alongside many other critics of the administration, the leftist lunacy page that they created. Who's to say that the administration won't find that to be prosecutable? I mean, they're very clearly trying to design a system of surveillance that goes after people who they consider to be anti-fascist extremists and pro-trans extremists, pro-abortion activists, right? It's unbelievably vague. It's unconstitutional. There's no domestic terrorism statute in this country. It goes against the First Amendment. That's the reason why the KKK is never prosecuted, right? Until they do something actually that is criminal, but not their speech or their organizing. And yet this administration is trying to make that illegal, and not necessarily the KKK, of course, but they're trying to make leftist and liberal organizing and political dissent illegal. And if people think, oh, it's just the left radicals, it's just people like Hasan, who I don't always agree with, they're being foolish. I mean, the administration has tried to censor Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel is a vanilla, cookie cutter liberal guy, and he didn't even say anything that was offensive. And even if he did say something that was offensive, why does the government get to have a say on a comedian's offensive commentary? That's, again, terrifying. They'll come for all of it.
Just to go back to something that you said, previously, you mentioned TikTok and the TikTok ban. And I covered the sale of Musical.ly actually to TikTok. And I think the TikTok ban is it's such a clear example of Israel and sort of like all of these interests sort of pressure, seeking to censor speech. It was done through manufacturing a moral panic about these TikTok challenges and child safety, right? But also, let's not forget that the reason TikTok was, owned by ByteDance to begin with is because Musical.ly was being driven out of business because of Meta, competition from Meta going in and doing all these aggressive tactics to capture their creator community, to capture their user base, et cetera. And I think if we had cracked down on that anti-competitive behavior from Meta back in the 2010s, Musical.ly might have remained independent. You know what I mean? We wouldn't have even had to worry about the sale to ByteDance. So it's sort of like interesting to sort of relook at that case. And there is this movement on the left of like log off, right? Which is great in a lot of ways. We want people offline in the world, engaging in mutual aid, like getting, not becoming totally brain poisoned by the internet. But leftists have also completely abdicated tech policy, I would argue. And even throughout the TikTok ban, you had TikTokers staging these, protests at the Capitol that leftists weren't covering, they weren't getting involved with. We had two of the biggest antitrust cases last year against Google and Meta. I didn't see any leftist content creators even talking about that. We could have unwound the Instagram deal, right? And obviously it didn't go through, but there was no sort of motion from the left to talk about tech and to talk about tech policy. Even now, the Kids Online Safety Act is back in the mix. I don't see people covering it. Why do you think the left has sort of failed to connect a lot of these dots? Because I agree with you, what they understand, the vast censorship, they understand the sort of offline censorship. But when it comes to online censorship, it seems like a lot of them do buy into this reactionary framing, the moral panic framing, or they're just not engaged on tech policy.
I mean, part of that could be because there's so many different places that the left is hyper focusing on. And maybe they're just oblivious to this as well. I mean, I've covered the SESTA stuff already. I mean, for years, and it was because obviously a lot of sex workers that I know were very frustrated by it. And a pattern that is also not dissimilar in that argument is currently being presented right now. The notion that these initiatives are to protect children on the internet. It's the same as it was back then. It's not. It's never to protect children on the internet. That's just a way to market these bills, right? There are probably more effective measures of protecting children on the internet that ironically actually don't revolve around government surveillance, but more so revolve around like real world initiatives, like shifting their focus elsewhere, creating opportunities for children to be around one another in the real world that would create a healthier balance between their use time online and then also things that they're doing in the real world, especially because like access to the internet for children, I think, is also very important. There's a lot of important tools that they can gain access to, things that they would not be privy to otherwise, things that things that abusive parents might want to take away from them, access to information about, sexual violence, what that means. Like, that's why sex ed is very important. And it's part of the reason why the Republicans love banning it in schools. And they claim that it's to protect children. Meanwhile, it's literally to protect the pedophiles for the most part. So there are these sorts of tools. And plus, like, having tech illiterate 16-year-olds is probably not going to be good by the time they make it to 16 and then all of a sudden they're on the internet, and this is now a much more advanced internet that they weren't privy to. So there are a million different complications that I can think of that I find to be troublesome. As far as why the left is not involved in this initiative, I don't even know how much power they would even have at this point, whether or not they were involved. But that's somewhat defeatist. They should be involved for sure. And I don't know why they're not as invested in this. Maybe it's because somewhere along the way, I think overall the left was always in favor of free speech. The left was the protectorate of free speech initiatives forever, right? It was the Nancy Reagans of the world and people like that wanted to create some sort of morality police around what was permissible and what wasn't. And it was the left that said, no, you can have like degenerate content out there. You can have degenerate art out there. Like, there's no way, we should not be tampering artistic expression. And I think maybe in the 90s with Hillary Rodham Clinton, the liberal and left also got involved in censorship initiatives somewhat. And it became this bipartisan thing. And then in the late 2010s, it was the right that wanted to defend being able to say hate speech and do hate speech on these private platforms that seemingly started shepherding the free speech conversation in their direction, while also being some of the most aggressive defenders of censorship, some of the most successful defenders of censorship. I think there's a real pivot point here, even from a partisan political perspective, that liberals should become the free speech defenders once again, in my opinion, because I do think that a lot of Americans, regardless of party affiliation, do care about that. And it is a popular initiative. I mean, I've talked to people who are lifelong, at this point, Trump supporters, 3-time Trump voters. And when they hear about what the administration is doing with the subpoenas against me or what the British government has done, they're actually horrified by it. I mean, they still love Trump, but they don't like that, right? And I feel like the left should take ownership over free speech initiatives once again, because we're going to be the people that they take out first, for sure. And that's always been the case, right? I mean, the right has been able to do this thing successfully, where on the one hand, and woke 1.0, if you want to call it that, they've been able to actively continue banning books and doing deliberate initiatives that are anti-speech, the Manhattan Institute concocted anti-CRT initiative, anti-DEI initiative, the idea that like Florida as a state is on the one hand supposed to be cherishing the values of free speech, but then has anti-BDS measures. And on top of that, has banned certain kinds of educational initiatives in their schools, like in their community colleges, and also are actively banning books. Like, that is anti-free speech. They are getting to dictate what your children can and can't learn. And there is no greater anti-free speech initiative than that. And yet if you ask the average American, they still have this false notion that it's actually the liberals that are against speech. And I think part of that is because of the liberal side taking ownership over anti-speech initiatives, even if it's actually still geared by and motivated almost entirely by the right. I think the right is very the right is very smart. The Heritage Foundation is very smart about concocting these narratives, right? Project Esther, which is like the accompanying version of Project 2025, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, wanted to take advantage of the bipartisan and dare I say actually liberal advocacy network that existed for tackling any sort of like anti-Semitic speech on the internet, or for the most part, anti-Zionist speech on the internet that they portray as anti-Semitic, to take out prominent critics of Israel. And it's not because the Heritage Foundation cares about anti-Semitism. I mean, you know, Sebastian Gorka is like the counterterrorism guy, and he's literally a Nazi. Like, he wore a straight up Nazi pin, the Vitesse Ren pin, in Trump's 2020 inauguration. This group literally hunted Jewish people in Hungary. Like, that was their job, right? So it's these guys that are, you know, quote unquote, tackling vicious anti-Semites on the internet. And the reason why they are tackling that from this angle, and Mahmoud Khalil's, hasty deportation initiative was absolutely in line with this agenda, is because they want to open the door to more restrictions on what you can and can't say. And they know that if they go after vulnerable targets like immigrants, you know, green card holders, legal permanent residents, or undocumented migrants that are still supposed to be protected by the First Amendment according to the Constitution, they can justify more restrictions later down the line. So it's the anti-Semitism stuff is just a way to open the door to further restrictions because it's bipartisan, because a lot of liberal advocacy groups are also trained to go after and demand the speech restrictions of, or the deplatforming of, people that some of these groups have declared as anti-Semitic. Whether they're actually anti-Semitic or not doesn't matter. As long as these advocacy groups say that they're anti-Semitic, then a lot of these liberal groups will say, yeah, take these guys out.
I totally agree with you. At the same time, I want people on the left to also understand that it goes beyond Israel, right? Because they're also targeting anti-immigrant speech. They've been targeting, as you mentioned, workers, right? LGBTQ people. Marsha Blackburn said that we need to pass KOSA to protect children from the transgender in society, right? And so, I mean, also, if you want to talk about the Heritage Foundation, one of the core policies that they've been trying to enact for years is repealing Section 230. And I'm not sure how sort of familiar you are, but I was hoping you could sort of talk a little bit about Section 230 and why it's so important, because I think a lot of people on the left these days, again, they sort of have this false understanding. They don't really realize that Section 230 protects like users' speech, and they think like, they hear that it like doesn't let us hold platforms liable, right? And so they want to hold everything liable. I don't know. They think of it as this way of cracking down on big tech. You've covered FOSTA-SESTA, obviously the first big amendment to Section 230 that was supposed to hold big tech accountable. I would argue big tech is only more powerful in the past 10 years, and the right has only seized more sort of the internet since FOSTA-SESTA passed. But why is protecting Section 230, so crucial, especially right now?
Because if we don't have safe harbor provisions for online publishers, and we hold them accountable for what like independent users are doing, then they're going to be unbelievably censorious. And once that censorship initiative takes hold, beyond what we obviously understand as like criminal things, right? Because they still abide by subpoenas when the federal government is demanding them.
And Section 230 doesn't protect against illegal content, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're doing a crime on the internet, if you're like distributing child sexual abuse material, like of course that's unbelievably illegal, and everyone understands that is not supposed to be protected by free speech, and it's not protected. And unless you're Elon Musk, for the most part, people do get prosecuted for that, right? With some very notorious exceptions on Twitter. However, what they want to do is basically start prosecuting, like start creating legal hurdles on all of these platforms, like that the government decides is harboring unsafe speech, right? And I could totally see myself being in the crosshairs where the government could just as easily be like, look, you have to deplatform this guy because we've decided that his speech is unsafe, and and they're saying this already, like Jonathan Greenblatt will go on television, and every single time there's like a crime that takes place, we'll point back to someone like myself and say Hasan Piker is responsible for this. Now that's a defamatory statement, because, you know, and the ADL is certainly no stranger to always defaming people. But that will now have a lot better standing in the hands of the government, and these platforms will actually take action instead of just saying, no, we're not prosecuting people on our own. We're not dictating what is appropriate and what's inappropriate on these platforms at the behest of the government. But if they're legally held liable, they certainly will have to do that, because at the end of the day, these guys want to make money. All they care about is generating profits. So of course they're going to be like, all right, yeah, we'll ban this guy. It's nothing for them to do that. And they already do that. They already do that for their own personal ideological reasons, for example. Like, I mean, Meta is unbelievably censorious when it comes to pro-Palestinian speech, for example. They've also like figured out a way to cordon off the pro-Palestinian users so that they're only talking to one another rather than like a more expansive audience. God forbid they're able to convince people who might be in the margins, right? So there are already so many different nefarious initiatives that people that these platforms engage in for ideological purposes, and then to have the government force their hand would make it all but an inevitability that the government gets to control what is said and what isn't said on all these platforms.
I'm curious if you support, there's this new law called the Jawbone Act that Ron Wyden and Ted Cruz have come together to support, LOL, at Ted Cruz. But, you know, Wyden has been really good on privacy. And jawboning, for people that don't know, it's when the government sort of tacitly pressures platforms to take down content they don't like. This is something that Republicans have long accused Democrats of, and Democrats have absolutely engaged in. The Biden administration, they were not found guilty of it formally by the Supreme Court, but they absolutely pressured platforms to take down certain speech. Trump is doing this now. And so the Jawbone Act is this law that's being proposed now that would create this cause of action against any government agency or employee that engages in jawboning, even if the censorship doesn't succeed. And it would require agencies to submit to Congress communications with companies, basically so that you could have transparency and you could see when one of these government agencies or representatives is trying to get specific people deplatformed, whatever. So I'm curious your thoughts on sort of jawboning and these efforts to bring more transparency to that space, because I have not seen anyone on the left speak about the Jawbone Act. And it seems like something that you of all people would, I guess, like be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm victim to it. And I didn't know about it, I'll admit. But, you know, as soon as I read up a little bit on it right before we started, I was like, that sounds like a great initiative. Does Ted Cruz know that he wants to jawbone me? Is he aware? I mean, let's not tell him. It's fine. If he's on board, then that's great. I'm totally in support of this, especially because, like I said, that is quite literally happening to me right now with this dual condemnation bill, right? Republicans don't want Candace Owens's commentary to be out there, and there's plenty of Democrats who don't want my commentary to be out there. I'm not making a moral equivalence between what I'm saying and what Candace Owens is saying, obviously. You know, we each have our very different audiences, right? And we each say very different things, oftentimes at odds with one another. And yet this dual condemnation bill is specifically designed for platforms to go out and deplatform people like myself. I mean, Richie Torres, another Democrat, he used the congressional letterhead 5 days before the general election to demand that Amazon blacklist me, to demand that Amazon deplatform me, to demand that Amazon ban me. Now, to give Twitch some credit, they didn't actually ban me, but they did blacklist me on the night of the election. And in spite of that blacklisting, I still was in the top 10 of live broadcasters on the internet. 9 of the other top 10 broadcasters were all right-wing. I was the only left liberal outlet that was covering the f***ing election, and you had a Democratic congressperson 5 days before the general election demanding that the most prominent left content creator in the political sphere get deplatformed because he didn't like what I was saying about Israel. That's insane. And there's no punishments for this, but that is part of the reason why there is this overarching attitude that, liberals are censorious. Liberals want to censor people. But I do think there's a new opportunity here because of all the Israel stuff. I think a lot of people realize that if you criticize Israel, they come after you. They try to censor you. They demand that you get canceled. They demand that you lose your job. And I think a lot of people are frustrated by that. And not only does that feed into the enmity towards Israel and its war crimes, and it generates more salience for what Israel is doing, more transparency into what Israel is engaging in. But it also, I think, creates an initiative to defend speech in this country. No matter how big of a Trump supporter anybody is in this country, and I've had many conversations with Trump supporters, when I tell them that there are, AIPAC-backed bills in more than 30 states that have directly contradicted the First Amendment and have created provisions in places like Texas, for example, where if you want to become a school teacher in a public school, you have to sign a loyalty pledge to the state of Israel. They lose their minds. They're like, what are you talking about? This sounds insane. But it's real. That's a real thing that people do without even thinking about it, right? In so many of these different circumstances, it's a direct violation of the First Amendment. It was Dianne Feinstein and Bernie Sanders who actively said this was these BDS initiatives are against the First Amendment. And yet there's no conversation around it. And just like you mentioned, there's no conversation around these other censorship initiatives against, that are presented as like combating big tech and protecting children. And therefore, they kind of get to push this stuff. And then we just one day wake up and realize that we're living in a very different internet. We're living in a very different world. And it's terrifying.
Yeah. And that's because I would say the right has dominated the conversation on tech policy. And I hope that more people, obviously you've spoken out about these laws. I know you covered KOSA the last time it was sort of coming up, but like these laws are being shaped and these platforms themselves are being shaped by the far right. And I think we're looking, a decade into this like really aggressive effort to dominate our tech ecosystem. And yeah, the left is like not even talking about these state laws, or again, they're falling for the cracking down on big tech framing. And there are so many ways we can crack down big tech: comprehensive data privacy reform, antitrust regulation, or litigation, all of these other ways that we'd actually sort of hold big tech accountable that don't have to do with making sure some content creator you don't like doesn't appear in your algorithm, right? Or making you scan your face to Google something. Well, Hasan, thank you so much for chatting with me today, and can't wait to, see you continue to speak out against online censorship laws.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for fighting the good fight. Someone's got to do it.
As a reminder, Free Speech Friday is a series that I do every week covering tech policy and the fight for online freedoms. It runs across my YouTube channel, podcast, and newsletter. As I said throughout this interview, it is so crucial that people on the left wake up and start educating themselves on tech policy. Shaping the laws that govern our technology has been a primary way the far right has been able to seize power in this country. And I want people on the left to join the fight against these mass surveillance and censorship laws. So if you want to support this work, please buy a paid subscription to my Substack newsletter at usermag.co. That's usermag.co, or support me on Patreon via the link below. On my Patreon, I do bonus episodes, a monthly Q&A live stream, and more. On my newsletter, I send a weekly roundup of everything that I'm reading and following online. You can also get that newsletter via my Patreon. I currently have 0 long-term brand partnerships, 0. So truly every single dollar of your support makes such a difference. It's the only way that I can continue to keep this series going. Thanks so much, and I'll be back next Friday with a brand new episode of Free Speech Friday. See you then.